Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It turns out the threat of U.S. tariffs on Canadian products had a number of unintended consequences. Canadians banded together, like we usually do during the Olympics, openly touting pride in our country and the products made in our country. And while the threat is currently on hold, it begs the question, did the U.S. president do us a favor? I'm Kris McCusker, and today on The Big Story, we speak to a marketing professor about all of this, the newfound Canadian nationalism, and why we should be doing research if we want to participate. Dr. Joanne McNeish is associate professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. So what do you make of it?
This is almost one of those causes that most Canadians, regular Canadians, can get behind. So after almost several years of arguing and debate, and the American election is as divisive in Canada as it was in the US, this is an easy one. Let's all get behind buying Canadian. And what was striking to me is how quickly brands, companies, small producers, small business, big business got behind the movement. Now, one reason for the quickness is, of course, social media, but it was done in a straightforward way. People showed their supply chain. There was an amazing seed manufacturer who said, it's really easy to buy Canadian, and boy, would we ever appreciate it. So it was also done with what has been traditionally known as the Canadian humility. It surprised me. The speed surprised me. And the relatively positive nature. There wasn't bashing American brands. It was, look at all these great brands that we have in Canada.
Because I was in the grocery store on Saturday, and a man beside me said, do you know where that celery came from? Can you read that sign? I said, no, it doesn't say. He said, okay, well, I'm not doing it because I don't know that it's from Canada.
Right. That little quickness that it spilled right into grocery shopping. And I, too, saw people picking things up in the grocery store and putting them down. And because I'm a marketing professor, I'm always fascinated to sort of observe people. And I thought, well, maybe they just were trying to decide because some things it's due to the price point. But I was watching one gentleman who literally went to 3 or 4 counters and was definitely examining the signs. And by the way, some of the grocery stores made it much easier. They pointed to the things that are made in Canada. For example, the milk producers of Canada, they pointed out that they've always labeled with a Made in Canada symbol, but they wanted to raise the awareness of that again so that if you go to the milk section, you can make a choice between the different milks, cheese, butter, products. So I thought that again was taking assets that they already have and re-promoting them on this wave of Buy Canada.
Well, and there's a website out there, Made in Canada, that's been around since 2018, and they had a huge uptick in visitors over the weekend. So, they've been around since 2018, which was around the same time that Trump put the tariffs on the first time. So we sort of got away from the Buy Canada, and now everybody's coming back.
That's always the difference, that if this were the first time, the resources wouldn't have been in place as fast. Now, many of the resources were in play, and that's one of several sites that are available. So this time, people had it ready. Plus, we've been at this for about a month. In other words, Trump's been threatening this before he got into office. Then it was going to be the beginning of the year. Then it was going to be February 1st. Then he really did it. Now it's delayed. And so it's one that it's not like an overnight success, as it were. It's something that's been building for a while. And again, I would say it's more of a boycott rather than a boycott. In other words, it's buy Canadian rather than boycott American. And then the second piece of this is people actually looked at things from other countries. So from Mexico, again, in the fruit and vegetable section in particular, where we don't have a lot of things, fresh things can be grown in the winter in most Canadian provinces. And so people were actually positive toward Peru or any of the South American countries, or South Africa for oranges, or Mexico in particular. Also, people were reacting very positively. So it also joined Canada to any country but the boycott piece of America was not American, but any other country is acceptable. And so that's at least the first piece of the campaign in terms of this. The second piece is confusion is going to set in because it's not quite as easy to buy directly from a Canadian company. So there are small Canadian companies, but the free trade agreement did decimate the Canadian manufacturing sector. So Brian Mulroney, a long time ago, signed the deal with the devil. And so the actual full supply chain isn't perfectly available in Canada except from small producers.
I feel like this is a time where Canadian companies should be capitalizing on this sort of newfound spotlight.
I agree. And it's especially powerful for local and small producers. And again, it's an easy play in the sense, and the transition is not difficult. Easy to add to your website, easy to create a sticker that says you're made in Canada. It's easy on social media to do this. So we live in a time that for a small producer, a small company, they can quickly add this with very little cost. And then on the consumer side, what consumers have to understand is there's 4 ways that something could be labeled. There's the things that are actually end-to-end made in Canada. But again, there's limitations. So there could be Canadian ownership, Canadian sourcing of raw materials, where it's manufactured, and where it's packaged. And the toughest one is where it's packaged can allow it to say packaged in Canada. So people, if the extension of this movement would be people would be given on some of these websites, okay, so here's the 4 ways it could be labeled as made in Canada, produced in Canada, packaged in Canada. And all of those things are good for the Canadian economy because it does improve or increase the revenue going to at least a Canadian-based company in some form. However, just be careful. Tim Hortons, which everyone thinks is Canadian, is owned by a Brazilian holding company. So the final piece of this would be, where do the profits go to? Where's the tax paid by these companies? And so for Tim Hortons, for example, the profits will go back to the Brazilian holding company. So in this very complex world, this can be good. I think we want to support local and small businesses because small businesses may, if properly supported, grow into big companies. So there's nothing wrong with a boycott, which means buy Canadian wherever you can. The second piece of this is it's also good for the environment. If things are made locally, that means they haven't driven as far, we haven't used as much energy. There's lots of other good reasons that this could be tied to environmental sustainability, and that helps keep the momentum going. Because any movement of this sort, everybody gets tired. We're all got busy lives. And so how can you make this movement keep going over the long term? And certainly Trump's going to help us out because he'll be back at this again next month. So it's fun to say, hey, how could this be that we recreate or re-energize the manufacturing and supply chain manufacturing and production capability of Canada? That can be only good.
And I guess there is the possibility that some Canadian-made products could cost more. Do you know?
So I think, again, that's a complex argument. I think that there's so many costs involved in producing things. So something packaged in Canada has inputs from other countries. And so it is fascinating to look at, say, the car supply chain, parts and manufacturing in the auto industry. They crossed the border several times. So if the tariffs went into place, it would impact both Canadian and U.S. consumers. So the difficulty is I wouldn't even hazard the guess. We'd have to go down to a particular sector, to a particular size of company, and do the financial analysis. And smarter people than me have done it, for example, on the automobile industry, where it's deeply integrated and things cross the border back and forth. The other piece to this is trucks that come from Mexico still have to pass through the American border. So how does that work? So tariff is on the country of origin. So will we be charged twice for things that come from Mexico? And does it matter if it's on a truck versus on a plane? So there's lots of complexities to these that I don't think we can begin to sort out. The other piece is, do we actually need, and I stood in the store and counted this, I need to get a life, but there were 40 different brands and or types of cookies in the small grocery store that I went to. And I said, do we really need 40 types of cookies, of which 10 were chocolate chip? Do we really need that many? And so there was a time when, in fact, you went in the store, there were 2 or 3 brands of cookies. So the other choice is, do we actually need that much choice? Can we go back to a time where things weren't always available in every season? And would that be so terrible? You used to buy apples when they were available. There weren't apples year round. Raspberries and strawberries you bought in season. Things can still be available frozen and canned, and that used to be an acceptable alternative. And the second piece of this is, how many things do we really need to choose from? And if we reduce the number of things we choose from, what would the effect of that be? Well, it'd be better in terms of an ease of shopping. The other piece would be from a sustainability. That's a lot of packaging for multiple choices of all the same thing. So some of this to me is interconnected.
Do we run the risk, do you think, of bragging too much about Buy Canadian and there's then backlash from the US?
So I think that's a really interesting point, this idea of, as visible as we are to each other, talking about the Buy Canadian movement, and then in some social media posts gloating about how we put one over on Trump. He and his team and the US population can also see those posts. And so there's always a risk in poking the bear. In other words, Trump has a particular style of negotiating. Most important thing is that he win. He has to think he won and be perceived that he won. I think we need to stick on the side of the modest Canadian, as I saw with these lovely local producers of all kinds of things, talking about their beautiful products and why they would love if people bought those instead. Great strategy, being loyal, checking the packaging. But this idea that we got anything over Trump, absolutely not a great way to negotiate with him. And in a sense, we as consumers are all part of the negotiating team. So bring it down, because he's got 4 years to literally manipulate our economy through his very inconsistent behavior. He has nothing to lose by doing anything but do what he wants to do and look for the things that make him feel good about himself, which is being perceived as winning. The other thing is, you also antagonize the American citizen, and there are starting to be some commentary on social media how American consumers are saying, well, you know what, we just won't buy Canadian products. And we need to remember that we do export products and services to the Americans, and they could easily replace our products. Now, easily, automobile industry, not so quickly, steel and aluminum, not so quickly, but seafood, for example. So we need to be a little cautious with rhetoric that sounds defiant or sounds as if we've won something.
You also had some observations on Ontario Premier Doug Ford that he's been basically speaking the U.S. president's language.
I think Doug Ford and Donald Trump are cut from the same cloth, and a really clever strategy to threaten to pull the contract from Elon Musk. That's a language that also Elon Musk understands, who right now is an integral part of Trump's inner circle. And so the defiance, and I always think bully respect bully, standing up and doing something threatening is a powerful stance to take. And it seems to me that one day there'll be an image of the two of them together, whatever roles that they will have, that they will be standing together laughing with their hats on Doug Ford's already did the hat routine. Canada's not for sale. Shout out to the Canadian manufacturer who produced that hat and who is selling out. Good for them. And Trunk's Make America Great, because it's the same messaging, it's the same rhetoric, it's the same grandiose talking. And Trump respects that. That's the kind of way he negotiates, and he loves when someone else does that. And so I know people are saying, well, wait a minute, that has implications. Of course, any threat to pull out of a contract to reduce service to Canadians is certainly threatening to people who are depending on that or depending on the plans for that. But in this kind of negotiation, nothing wrong with that. Their names both begin with D. I wonder if that means anything. But they're matching each other head to head with public, strong, exaggerated statements. And at the end, pull back from whatever they said they were going to do. But in this kind of play, the theater of this, the public theater, that is the right way to do. It doesn't threaten Donald to have somebody come back at him. That's power respects power, game respects game. That's all that is. Again, I want to be cautious because these are uncomfortable times. These have real world implications for all of us in terms of the movement of the Canadian dollar downward, the movement of our stock market. And finally, let's not forget all these things are cyclical. We've been here before. It takes time to sort these things out. So this will not be short term for any of us, whether you are the single consumer going to the store, small business, local business, large corporation. I am hoping we have good, strong negotiators doing things privately, working with the associations in the US to, in fact, influence Donald within his own country. And the public rhetoric we should enjoy for what it is, which is theater.
So in a way, did Donald Trump do us a favor by reigniting the idea of Buy Canadian?
So I really like that question, that idea of sometimes a threat shocks us out of our complacency. I think the individual Canadians would be surprised to learn how little production and manufacturing we have left in this country. We used to have great producers and manufacturers. And I would encourage people to go look at the list of these great companies. So Maple Leaf Foods, for example, great meat, family-owned business, been here a long time, great job, great reputation. We should be considering these companies. We should be supporting these companies. And for a company like that, could it be they'll get in a store that they might not have got into otherwise? Could Weston Foods or Metro or Sobeys, Farm Boy, consider them a little more strongly now, making sure, give them an extra shelf spacing. So I think that's just a really interesting thought, because threats often make us change our behavior because change is hard and you need a good reason to change. So I would like this to be a time when, as Canadians, we look at these great manufacturers and producers and say, these are great products. It just, I wasn't aware of them before. So this might also raise awareness, because again, I think people, you're not conscious. When you buy as a consumer, you do habitual behaviors. You walk around, you buy the same things. All of us stopping to look at where things come from and potentially trying some, quotes, new brands that are Canadian, that could be a good thing. So again, there's some really difficult things that don't look like favors, but I might conclude that this could be the start of brand new Canadian companies, or a company considering moving to the US. And a few have talked about moving the production back, but maybe it opens up space for a new small Canadian manufacturer who can grow into something big. So always out of anything bad, one tries to look for the silver lining. So could that be the silver lining of this situation?
Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you, Kris, so much.
Dr. Joanne McNeish is an associate professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. You can send us feedback on this episode or any episode of The Big Story by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. I'm Kris McCusker. Thanks for listening.